Dilip, if you could take over from here and then maybe we could start. Okay, maybe we'll just wait for a few minutes and then we'll start. Just give us a couple of minutes here. Yeah.
Hello everyone, welcome to Future Earth Science Awareness Webinar 8. So today's topic is biodiversity conservation. So I'm Dilip Naidu. So I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Indian Institute of Human Settlements. My work mostly is on how climate change affects vegetation, soil, and their interactions. So today we have two distinguished guests with us to talk about biodiversity conservation. To begin with, it's Ajay Singh. So Ajay Singh currently is pursuing his PhD in forestry at the Forest Research Institute, India, and in collaboration with the WII in Dehradun. So he brings over 7 years of experience in forestry and biodiversity, and his journey has taken him through esteemed institutions such as National Environmental Engineering Research Institute, National Institute of Himalayan Ecology, and WII. With expertise spanning vegetation, wildlife, landscape ecology, and biodiversity management planning, he has gained significant knowledge in conservation sector. His notable achievements include his role in crafting the integrated landscape management plan for the Panna landscape, as well as spearheading the development of the biodiversity conservation plan and action toolkit for the same region. He earned his bachelor's in zoology from the Hindu College in Delhi University and master's degree in environmental management from FRI. So with that, we can ask Mr. Ajay Singh to go ahead with his talk. And after his talk, we'll have a question answer session, and then we'll move to the second speaker of the day.
Hello, am I audible? And can you see my video also? Can you confirm?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
So, thank you so much, Dilip, for the introduction. And I'm very happy and honored to be given the opportunity for presenting in this webinar. And a special thanks to Ms. Smriti Besnet, who introduced me to this webinar, and also to the Adhish Rao, who facilitated the my discussion for this webinar. So I think I'll share my screen now. Please confirm if you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see your screen, uh, but
Okay,
it's
I'll
not
put it
in
on
full
the.
screen.
Yes, yes, I'll do that. And I'll turn off my video also because I don't want to interrupt my connection also. Uh, can you see my screen? Is it in full mode, right?
Yeah, you can go ahead. You can start.
Yes. Thank you so much, everyone, and welcome once again to this webinar and the talk. And so, my topic of the webinar is related to the landscape approaches. Don't get overwhelmed by the kind of a very large topic here, but the point is to make it clear to the audience, which I suppose is the students and the researcher working in the same sector, conservation, may be related to this. And so today I'm going to talk about the landscape level approaches to deal with the biodiversity conservation. And this comes from my insight from the previous project I was working in with the Wildlife Institute of India from past 6 years, and which is in the Panna landscape. And during the presentation, I'll explain the landscape also, some of it. So to begin with, this is the contents of my presentation, and typically talking about the landscape diversity challenges, planning, and way forward. Not exactly following the topics, but the concepts that are written here. So, to begin with, to understand this, the whole concept of biodiversity conservation, we need to first understand what is a landscape. I think everyone knows the landscape, but sometimes we need to come to some basic understanding so that we can go ahead to reach a platform where we all understand what is meant by landscape ecology and biodiversity conservation. So, what is a landscape? So, the land which is around us, and you, as you can see in the picture also, a landscape is a uh, land or the natural resources which is around us, and including the forest, water, agriculture, and you can see there are settlements also. So we can say that it's a mosaics of land of different land uses, and which is also especially heterogeneous. Heterogeneous in the sense that there are different kind of land patterns, as you can see in this picture. And when we talk about the diversity and diversity in the landscape, so mainly when we say what is a diversity, we say that the diversity of the animal diversity. For example, you can see in the right side of the picture, which is the diversity of the birds, mammals, reptiles, fishes, uh, all these the animals which we see around us. It makes up the animal diversity, different kind of animals. But another diversity which is there is regarding which is the habitat diversity. Habitat diversity is the diversity of the different landscape which are utilized by our biodiversity. So each of these are interconnected in the sense that the animals need their habitats to to do their functionality, to survive, breed, and other things. So at the same time, animal diversity depends on the habitat diversity. So when we talk about biodiversity conservation, we need to understand that there is a pool of animal diversity as well as a pool of habitat diversity. And in the middle of that is us. And we are not at the top of this web channel, but we are at the central of this diversity channel. Central by central, we mean that we have a role to conserve our habitats also, and also our animals. And yes, but when we talk about this landscape, as we saw in the previous picture, the landscape is the mosaic of land uses, land patterns, which is there around us. But when we talk about what is a landscape for a study or a research, so few of the things come up in mind. This is a picture of my study area. I'm in the our project area, and it's a very big landscape. This is a Panna landscape, and so few things which come up in our mind when we see that what is a landscape for a study or research. So a landscape for a study or research begins with the relevance to the study objectives. So what is the objective of the study? To understand the relevance of uh, the landscape delineations. So which again comes to the boundary of the landscape. So how we come up with this concept of what is the boundary of the landscape is I'll explain in the next slide also. But let's see that this is a big landscape, and you can see here that there is a land inside the protected areas. Protected areas are different uh, regions which has been delineated um, for the protection of the wildlife, and which includes national parks. As you can see in this picture, there are tiger reserves here. Middle of this is red with the red boundaries of Panna tiger reserves, and other wildlife sanctuary there in the landscape. So these are the protected area network. And again, we can see here, and we need to understand that there is a huge land which is bigger than the land inside protected area, which is land outside protected area. So when we talk about the biodiversity conservation, here we need to understand that landscape is not just the protected areas, but also the land around us, which is outside the protected area and which is huge, and which has diversity of landscape, which we were talking about in previous slide, which can be our agriculture lands, our trees outside the forest land, other land patterns such as maybe the grasslands. We can say here you can see also there are grasslands. So this makes up a bigger landscape picture. So how to understand a landscape boundary? Um, uh, in a when we say that the last slide we were talking about how we see a landscape in a picture. So question also comes in the mind how our landscapes are distributed and how our landscape are delineated. So for this study, was a question: can animal character help in delineation of the landscape boundaries? So here comes the picture of landscape species. So landscape species are those species such as tigers, elephants, which does not just really uh, limit themselves in a very small area, but they migrate, they go to bigger landscapes, they utilize different land uses such as agriculture land or forest land, tree outside forest land. So these areas, even after, outside the protected area network, they go and comes, and for different reasons like breeding or uh, for food and other purposes. So here you can see in the picture that one of the landscape species in our landscape was the tiger. So tiger helps in delineation of this boundary because tiger movement was there inside and outside of the protected areas, including different types of protected area, which is national parks, wildlife sanctuaries. So this helps in to understanding that this can be our landscape boundary, and then we delineated it, and which includes a part of central India, which is two states, mostly coming under the Madhya Pradesh region, and secondly, some part of it coming under the Uttar Pradesh region. So I just wanted this slide is just has a significance that when we see our landscape and when we talk about the biodiversity, we just I think it is very important to understand that there is a huge land outside. There is huge type of biodiversity and huge type of land diversity outside, which is important for biodiversity conservation. So when we talk about the planning, we comes up with this. This is just to show that yes, there is a, when we talk about planning, there is two part maybe, this which is assessment and recommendation. Assessment is we assess what is the current or the existing situation of the landscape, uh, what are the practices that are there in the landscapes. With respect to that, uh, we give our recommendations, which has conservation perspective. So with that comes into the picture of the sampling. Sampling is, as I think we all know, that sampling is a strategy for conducting research in a landscape or in a study area. So here you can see the boxes. These boxes helps in the uh, quantifying or assessment of such a huge landscape. It's a grid system. These boxes are the grids of different sizes. I may not talk about much in detail, but this is just to showcase that when we study any project or when we study any area, which can be a small area also, or which can be a bigger landscape as like this Panna landscape, where we have to strategize how we can study that area. So where different kind of strategies comes in, and one of the strategy is systematic sampling. Systematic sampling is when you prepare a system. Likewise, in this is the grid system, so that we can equally, proportionally, and spatially, we are able to somehow uh, assess the whole area. And again, there are limitation obviously when you are working in such a big landscape. But yes, systematic sampling helps in at least uh, especially especially covering the large landscapes. So there are different strategies where we use in the Panna landscape, which is regarding you can see here the boxes, again the same boxes, but there are smaller boxes which has points. These points are camera trap locations. So camera trap, what is a camera trap? Camera trap is used for capturing the wildlife. So wildlife is there in the whole animal diversity, especially mammals, with including carnivores, herbivores. I mean those animals which eat other animals, or the animals which eat grasses or vegetation. So for assessment of those, we use camera traps. So camera traps, they click the picture when there is a animal movement there. So with that, we know the population or the distribution, not the population exactly, but the distribution of the animal in the landscape. Second is strategy is line transects. Line transects are kind of a line which we delineate in each of these boxes to assess the vegetation, to do the vegetation sampling. And also the sign survey. Sign survey is where we see the sign of the animals. Sign sign survey is a indirect method where, because as we know that animals we see around us may not be very I mean, we cannot just go and see the animals. Where there are different ways to like address their distribution. So the sign survey is an indirect method where we go and see the signs of the animals, such as the sign of the paws of the tigers or other animals, and sign of the scat. Scat is the waste material of the excreta of the animals, and other scratch marks and other those things. It's just to uh, make sense that to how we, when we study or when we research about the biodiversity, so how we utilize different methods, how we come up into different methods which helps in assessment of the biodiversity. I'll and in uh, slides further will understand the significance. So what are the limitations and challenges of any project or any biodiversity conservation related aspect when we do a research about it? So there are different kind of limitations. Limitation can be resource limitations, time frame limitation, season and study parameter. Resource means resources is us, manpower and budget. Manpower and budget means the uh, how many people are there and how much the money is there with any project or with any study. So there is always a limitation which defines our study goals and objectives. And there is a time frame because any study, any research always has a time frame within which it has to be completed. So another is season, and season is a very important factor. Why it is an important factor? Because many animals which is around there can be studied in particular seasons. They all have different season. For example, when we talk about for example, vegetation. So vegetation, when if we are studying the flowering or the fruiting pattern of the trees, vegetations, so those have a season. For example, post monsoon meaning after monsoon. So such limitations or challenges are there to address the assessment of biodiversity around us. And then there are study parameters. So there are numerous n number of study parameters. For example, when we go for a research of animals or any biodiversity, so we quantify their distribution, maybe population, or there some of their characteristics, but there are always a limitation to it because due to the some time again with the time frame, season or resource limitation, we always have to confine to certain parameters that can be measured and within a time uh, deal with to it. So the next question is how to deal with these limitations and the challenges. So, and again, the question comes is the collection of primary data enough? So when we have this question, we know that what is a secondary data. Secondary data is a data which we collect from different sources, including government reports, published literatures, and there may be the same area. There was a previous project report that gives us the picture of the study and to understand whatever the biodiversity or the landscape we are dealing with. So, but again, when we talk about what about the study parameters? So, for example, I previously in the previous slide I said that there are study parameters which are determined by our time frame and the season of the study. So so there are many sources where we can depend on, where we can access the data related to the study parameters. Again, we can contribute it to such data also. So there are different, in the left side, you can see certain databases are there. These databases are regarding different uh, databases of vegetation or I mean other biodiversity. And in the right of this, you can see that there are citizen science program, and this is where it is very important. This slide is because we all need to understand that the citizen science program, for example, in India and all over the world, we can see is, for example, one of this is Global Biodiversity Information Facility, GBIF, which is a repository of different biodiversity and also their characteristics. And there are some other program like eBird is one of the big, very big citizen science program where the community like us, academician, non-academician, they contribute to the open data. eBird is for such data regarding to the our diversity related to the birds, where the people put bird data and their locations and some of the insight of the behavior they see with that measurement. And another is Season Watch, also is one of the citizen science program which is related to the diversity of the vegetation around us, where people contribute to the diversity of the vegetation they see around them, and also seasonally contributing their fruiting, their flowering patterns. So again, it's a very huge, very commendable program. And here, I think the role of everyone comes into picture when we talk about the biodiversity conservation. Citizen science is one of the, I think, a very important platform where we can access as well as we can contribute. So this is just a framework for when we say that how we are dealing with the conservation planning. I will not I will not get into the very deep into this, but just the how we say that we are going to do a biodiversity conservation planning. So there is habitats, as we talk about in the picture, landscape picture. So there are habitats. So we talk about habitat management. There are different type of communities of biodiversity that has to be prioritized. Then there are species of conservation significance. What is a species of conservation significance? It is a species which are important. For example, threatened species, endangered species, rare species. All these species are those species which are documented as which are very rare in our surroundings. Which, for example, we see a lot of birds which are common around us, but there are a lot of species which are not very common around us. So they need conservation, they need our support. So for that, we need to identify what are the species of conservation significance are. Uh, then prioritization and community as a center of it has a role. Uh, Ecosystem restoration. This is just one example when we say about different diversity or the of the landscape, different diversity of the landscape, including the grasslands, forest lands, riparian lands also. So this is one of the example of how we think that even the riparian zones or the riparian is a land which is adjacent to the river, and which is also ecotone of the forest or land system and the water system. So again, we think that this is also a very important ecosystem. So likewise, I just want to mention that there are different diversity of landscapes which need to be conserved. So again, this is just an example. Don't get overwhelmed again by the picture. Just this is just to showcase how the landscape features predict biodiversity. Meaning that as we know that there are different habitats that has been utilized by the biodiversity, which is inside the protected areas, which is outside the protected areas. So these all the landscape has certain characteristics which determines the characteristics of the biodiversity, which makes them the habitat. So how this is just analysis. I'll not again go into the deeper into it, but this utilize the landscape features. For example, the how the terrain of the landscape are, what is the current land use of the system is, how far the village settlements are. All these some of the landscape features has been used, and then these landscape features helps in the delineation of where we think the biodiversity richness can be. So it will be divided. It was divided into high, medium, and low. That means that there are biodiversity areas which has the potential to sustain the biodiversity, may not essentially has the biodiversity right now, but are essential and very important part of the biodiversity, and especially which are outside protected area region. So again, this is just to summarize that when we talk about the biodiversity conservation, it is not just one species or some of the species. It is multi-species. There is a huge pool of biodiversity out there, and there is landscape diversity. So there are different kind of ecosystem. Like in this landscape, we talk about terrestrial, aquatic, and riparian ecosystem. but again, there can be other ecosystem like marine ecosystem. So, and each of these ecosystems have different species which of mammals, vegetation, aquatic species, birds. And again, what is the way forward to it? Way forward is the protection, how we contribute to the protection of the biodiversity, management of the distribution and augmentation. Management of the distribution is there are several issues and threats to the biodiversity, including human wildlife conflict, which means that there is a regular and there is a pattern of interaction of us with the wildlife, and how we can make this a sustainable management, how we also sustain and also our wildlife sustain around us. So this is comes under disturbance or conflict management. And then augmentation is augmentation, which how we all can contribute and all how community contribute in different perspectives. For example, restoration examples, plantations and all, and then each community role in doing so. And again, it needs to be continuous meaning all this conservation effort has to have the continuity of it, and adaptability is we learn from our the challenges, we learn from the our findings, and then we make decisions accordingly. And then this next slide is again about how we can strengthen biodiversity. We can strengthen biodiversity. There is a citizen science program which students or us researchers or academician, non-academician, they all can contribute to the biodiversity around us. There are local institutions, there are stakeholders, including forest department or other departments around us, which can really come across and helps in the biodiversity conservation concept. So this is so thank you so much. I hope I could complete in time. I didn't actually get the track of the time.
Yeah,
Hello.
that's okay. So we'll just, is there any questions?
I have one. I just wanted to ask Ajay, how do you sort out the data sets with the like from different information that you get for the different species of animals? How do you take the only how do you sort the data that you get from those different sources? Like how do you have a particular way of extracting the data you want? Or you take the data set and then later go through it one by one?
Yeah, so again, when we were talking about the data, so when we study, when we have a landscape like this, we collect different parameters with different kind of diversity. For example, here we were talking about the mammal diversity, especially, and also the bird diversity. So that depends on the collection of the sampling data, and which has different methodologies, which we lightly touched upon in the presentation. So then collection of it and then processing, including obviously the primary processing is through the Excel and all, and then going into the software analysis of the all the data that we have collected. So this is how the process of, yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Yeah. Are there other questions?
Uh, I can't see anything in the chat. If there's any question, people can write it in the chat so that I can ask. So I was thinking of another question where, especially when you have a lot of these forest cover in protected versus non-protected areas, which are
Yes.
distributed, like there's a human settlement within those two. So what do
Yes.
you think of human wildlife conflict in those regions, and how do we go about creating corridors, keeping in mind human and wildlife conservation ideas?
So I think one of the important factor is awareness, I think. So dealing with the human wildlife conflict is the important thing is engaging the communities and making them as the center part of it or the main stakeholder, because community around us is dealing, we are doing the science, but the community is around us is getting affected or are affecting the wildlife. So there is an interaction between them. We should not always take it as a negative interaction, but there are positive interaction also. So but dealing with it requires awareness first, and then with the help of this awareness we need capacity building. Capacity building meaning we need to use the current tools and techniques, so to understand the conflict and then come up with the recommendations, and that should come up from the bottom up approach, meaning that in consultation with the community. That is, I think, a very important factor. Rather than based on our analysis or science we predict, we say something, it should come always with the consultation of the community and also other stakeholder like forest department. So there are strategies they are dealing with it, but are they skilled or not? Are they need do they need capacity building? That is where our role comes into picture. So I think that is how we can deal with the human wildlife conflict at a large scale context, I would say.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Yes.
I
Are
don't
there
see
other?
I don't see any other questions.
Okay. So
Yeah, thank you for
okay.
the amazing talk. Then I think we'll move to our next speaker.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity and the question answers also. And I may not be able to be there because I told she also that I have another event to attend. And but thank you so much, and it was really a pleasure to be in this webinar. Thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you, Ajay.
Thank
So our next
Did
speaker, uh, I'm the next speaker is Dr. Krishna Prasad. So Krishna Prasad Acharya is a distinguished conservationist with over 3 decades of experience in forest biodiversity conservation, wildlife advocacy, and sustainable livelihood development. He is based in Kathmandu in Nepal, and his career includes he has an extensive career that includes Secretary of the Government of Nepal, Director General for the Department of National Parks and Wildlife Conservation, and Department of Forests. He has authored and co-authored approximately 70 publications, greatly enriching the community participation on conservation science. His work has contributed to the recovery of species such as tigers and gharials in Nepal and has influenced policy and conservation practice. Dr. Acharya remains committed to advocating sustainable conservation practices that harmonize community involvement with scientific approaches to yield effective environmental outcomes. Presently, he is member of the Global Land Program, Future Earth. He is the chair of World Commission of Protected Areas, IUC in Nepal, Secretary General of South Asia Wildlife Informants Network, and adjunct professor at the Tribhuvan University in Kathmandu. We are glad to have you here, sir. So you can go ahead with the seminar.
Thank you, Abdul, for having this nice introduction. I welcome you all in my presentation, and let me share my talks here. So how is going to come in the screen?
It is not shared yet.
Just click here, and then it shows in a window a tab. Select a tab.
Yes.
Okay.
And after that, you have to, on the right side, you have to say entire screen. You have to choose entire screen and click on the screen.
That is screen, yes.
And click on the entire screen tab below and you can share.
Just a moment. Entire screen. but it's showing only my Chrome only.
On the right side, there's no option for window or
Window or tab, but it's ask for Google. Window.
if
Okay.
you have opened your presentation in Chrome, you can still use the Chrome tab to
The
present.
thing is it appearing now?
It's not
Can you
visible
see
yet. Not yet.
screen window and it says window and then Microsoft PowerPoint presentation share. So does it working now?
It is not visible yet, sir.
Sir, there's a share button at the top right corner of your screen.
Yeah, I did
And
that and then
yeah,
After that, you can select.
you should choose which screen you are showing, and you choose the screen that is there.
yeah, I choose and it says here is Microsoft PowerPoint and when I click share, now it doesn't appear. Have you seen now? No. Are you able to see it now? No. Maybe I can send it to of this here.
Yeah, you can share it to Adish, I guess.
Yeah.
I think it should reach to you now.
We can't see the screen, so I think you can send it
No, I
via
send,
mail.
I send mail to you.
Okay. Yeah.
Are you able to open it?
I think Adish has to reply. Has he received the email?
Okay, so shall I start now? I'm sorry for the delay.
Yes, sir,
Hello.
please start.
Okay, so this talk I'll be talking about today is about first of all, let me express my sincere thank you for providing this opportunity for Adeshji, Smriti ji, and all others engaged. I'll be speaking about biodiversity conservation and climate change, especially focus on Nepal's successful restoration efforts in this situation. I'll also discuss the existing threat to biodiversity conservation beyond the climate change. Mainly, we discussed in the previous talk also a lot about human wildlife conflict and development needs. So the second slide is about the decline. I think can you go to the second one? I cannot change from here. So this is about the loss of the wild population globally. The very recent 13th Living Planet report talk about over the past 50 years we have witnessed shocking around 60% decline in wildlife population globally, and it is largely due to human activities. This studies highlight the immense impact that we have on our planet and underscore the urgent need for effective conservation strategy. Next slide, please. And climate change and biodiversity losses are inseparable threats that must be addressed together. Climate change impacts biodiversity, and in turn, biodiversity contributes to mitigation and adaptation efforts of the countries. However, climate change is playing an increasingly important role in the decline of biodiversity, altering ecosystem worldwide. In Nepal, habitat conversion and degradation have significantly affected endangered species like the musk deer, red panda, and snow leopard. Research showed that climate change could render about 40% of existing rhinoceros unicorns habitat unsuitable, while expanding habitat for leopards, mainly the common leopards. Additionally, climate change impact species physiology, biological potential, and food resources. Natural disaster and invasive alien plant species further shrink habitats and degrade ecosystem. Addressing these challenges requires a comprehensive strategy to protect and manage the area effectively. I think we have this year observed very severe forest fire. In a month, we lost 26 people while fighting against the wildfire. So this slide is about possibility of a dangerous glacier lake outburst. And a very recent study conducted by EC mode showed that those are the potentially dangerous glacial lakes are located within Nepal's protected area system, and the risk of Gulf outburst is serious to both human settlements and wildlife. The next slide, please. As I said before, it's the twin crisis. UN General Secretary says about the twin crisis and the role of protected areas to revert the loss of climate change. And all global and national policy instrument, including Target 8 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, Paris Agreement, talk about these efforts. And we also have National Adaptation Plan of Action. The Sustainable Development Goals all align with Nepal conservation strategy. Very recently declares Nepal's protected area management strategy aims to create a climate resilient and financially self-sustaining PA system by 2030. And there is some provision of inclusion of climate adaptation measure for it. Next slide, please. So these, there are 4 slides explaining or showing the potential of, extreme event on the slide 6. You can see the different colors within the map of the Nepal are the protected area system. The red with the highest potential, highest in the risk PAs, and green being the lowest. So this shows what is the potentiality of extreme events. Next slide shows about in the risk within the protected system of this climate change impacts. And the next slide talk about the sensitivity And but there is a good point. The final slide, shows about the adaptive capacity. And if we see the adaptive capacity, there are some of the area have good part. Even Chito National Park, for example, Bardian National Park and Annapurna Conservation Area. These parks have some highest adaptive capacity, while rest of those mountain areas like Sagarmatha or there are national park like Rara National Park and others, they shows very high risk of high low adaptive capacity in terms of negative impacts of the climate change. The next slide talks about the main driver of biodiversity loss still remains the human land use, which is a IPBS study, and it's mainly for primary food production and the development needs. And addressing these challenges require sustainable land use practices that balance development with conservation. The next slide again talks about climate change exacerbation on the risk of extinction of many species. Now we come back to the Nepal. The next slide talks about Nepal's Nepal's commitment on net zero emission. Nepal has a very ambiguous greenhouse gas emission net zero greenhouse emission by 2050, aligning with global efforts to limit temperature rise within 1.5 degree centigrade. And there are a number of targets set for agriculture, transportation, forest, and other sector, the sector. And when we talk about this, given these all threats and habitat, challenges, is there possibility of species recovery? Yes, we can say yes. And the next is the guideline. The next slide shows the guideline of IUCN, which is about species recovery is achievable through the IUCN. This guideline is a conservation of translocation, the introduction, breeding, habitat restoration, and addressing the different kinds of the threat. And the next slide, explain about yes, it can be done. It has happened, around the goal for different species. For example, oryx, or for example, other species. This is a species from California. What about the Nepal case? The next slide talks about Nepal restoration example, and it is about the tiger. For example, we have 221 tigers in 2009, with the land use threats, climate change threats, disaster and conversion, deforestation, and the forest fire, and that time very severe illegal poaching and trade. But we Nepal committed in doubling the tiger. I think it's together with India. India also had their commitment in 121. We committed to double the tiger by 2022. When there was an assessment, Nepal, was able to achieve 365 tigers, not 235. 335 individuals of tiger is, I'm sorry, I typed 235, but it is 335 individuals in 2022. Again, the next slide talk about the recovery of this unicornus rhinoceros unicorn. It is found in Nepal and India, and India has the highest population, we know. But Nepal also significant achievements of species. In 2021 we have 752 species, which were reduced to 409 in 2005. It is mainly through habitat restoration. And the next slide shows about the Nepal's commitment on how we achieve the zero poaching, and basically it reduced the other threat, means the illegal trade and poaching, which was significantly zero for a few years. So it's a framework in how Nepal was achieved with the zero poaching framework. And the next slide talk about again the restoration success of population recovery of gharial. Is Gabelis giganticus, and this is one of my paper is published in herpetology. And there is also a vulture population very successfully restored in Nepal. So these are some of the good examples that Nepal have was able to achieve the restores in the face of climate change and other threats. And the next slide talk about the community forestry in Nepal. Maybe we do not need to talk much about this. The forest has restored, greenery, the hill in a mountain has restored. People have supply of forest products, and fragmentation has decreased. Actually, there was reduced number of forest patches means forests are interlinked and coordinate very effective corridor was established and people are getting benefits. So this across the country, more than 22,000 community-based community forestry are working. This example then highlights the commitment to restoration and conservation, setting a kind of benchmark for global efforts. But if you go to the next slide, then it also talk about there are threats again, and this is very important to note that we are entering into climate change adaptation planning, and now we have just agreed to introduce very formally the climate change adaptation and mitigation as a planning framework of port area system, which will assess vulnerability and predict the shape, plan for adaptation action, and this is a new kind of thing. And then capacity building. The right picture actually is where one rhino was fallen in a road construction hole, so it was lead to a death, and that has created development of green infrastructure guideline approved by the cabinet. So that also is a kind of green infrastructure ahead the road for protection of the wildlife species in Nepal. Then carbon sinks, everybody talk about this, and the Paporeira system possess the huge potential of generating carbon sink or creating mitigating effect for as with the low cost per unit area. And the another we need to work about this risk of reducing the risk from the vulnerability of reducing the risk of vulnerability of the species against these threats. And if you go to the next slide, it shows very interesting one figure, one very interesting can we go to the next slide? See here, how the development intervention is creating, not the previous one, how the previous the infrastructure, you can see how irrigation canal is fragmented the core habitat of wildlife species, and it's almost impossible to cross a wildlife and goes to its natural let's say habitat once they cross this path, or the word we can say the impact of fragmentation on wildlife very critical with the development needs. The next slide is about my final slide, and which it talks about behind the climate change. We face other critical challenges for biodiversity conservation. As I said, it's striking a balance between conservation and development, and we need engaging and advocating for stakeholder involvement is essential. I have proposed here is conservation. We talk about conservation and development. Now we should talk about conservation for development, and in that part we need a development, but we also have a responsibility of conservation. So how to seek the balance between two is very important, and ensuring the human wildlife coexisting is very critical, because we have increased number of species: tiger, rhino, elephant, gharial, every deer and others, and there is increased number of development need and population migration, and all those social dimension has created more frequent interaction between wildlife and people, leading to very serious stage of conflict. So we should work on coexistence. And then we also need to continue monitoring of the species, and the very experimental kind of research which really we lack, and we are putting some species on threat without having improper knowledge. The picture of this, the right side board is about Bengal florican. Maybe you are aware of it. This is one of the critical endangered species. Nepal just has about 50 fewer of this across the Nepal. So and it's a very specific habitat, habitat species, specific species. So this kind of conservation and protection of those kind of species very critical, and for this we need monitoring of population and the habitat dynamics. What another important aspect is, in some paper you can read, there is now increasingly we are going to face a generation gap of those conservation leaders now. conservation rangers. So the previous generation, existing generation, almost 75% at a time now, they are going out of their job or leaving as part of the retirement. And with this new challenges, to face new challenges, now we really need to work on youth engagement, how we can engage youth either through social media engagement or awareness creation, school program, or youth club, eco club, whatever it might be. There is a need at global scale to empower and to engage youth on conservation. Unless we are able to do it, we really are not able to address the new challenges of uh, protecting biodiversity in the face of climate change. So this is just a highlight, what Nepal has success, what is the situation of Nepal in climate change, and what are our policies. And there are a few examples of great success of restoration, and there are some critical threats outside biodiversity, outside climate change. And the last slide is about the suggestion how we could move ahead to address this threat. So this ends my presentation. I thank you, everybody, for your presence. So if there are some question and concern, I will be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for that very insightful talk. And it's really interesting to see how Nepal has come forward in conservation, especially in increasing endangered species numbers such as the rhinos. So we can take some questions if there are any. So I can ask one of question. So I was just thinking, now that we are going to go into an increasing the extreme climatic events, so what are some steps they're taking towards adaptive capacity building and adaptive climate adaptation in these protected areas, at least in Nepal?
Yes, I think we did not much consider about this adaptive inclusion of climate change agenda is mainstreaming, within portfolio system, portfolio management system. So very recently, National Park Department has decided, after this new strategy in 2022, that the management plan of national park will be revised, where one of the strong component will be climate change adaptation. So that is just the beginning, how we are going to address in document, legal document kinds of things. That will really help in future. So specifically, these approach are being used for high mountain protected area system. As I said, these are in great threat of glove. So for Sagarmatha National Park and Makalu National Park, we are going to implement it. In the past, in fact, there was some management of lake in Sagarmatha National Park a few years ago. And secondly, in terms of capacity development, there are some ongoing activities like for fire controlling or disaster planning within the management of water area, but they are not enough. So there is always challenge for budget and others, and habitat management, making suitable habitat. These are regular kinds of things, but we really need some adaptive changes kinds of thing to address. And the as usual business as usual scenario is not going to work. But I hope that with the inclusion of this new guideline and new budget, very specific budget allocation to climate change adaptation will help will help to address this issue.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And are there any other questions? Okay, I don't think there are any other questions. So thank you so much, sir, for giving us this very insightful talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so we done for the day. Thank you all for attending this webinar on biodiversity conservation. So if there are any end comments, I think Adish can proceed.